There's nothing that will make you feel more insecure than cosplaying a male anime character. I don't always drink wine, but when I do, I prefer kanpai. Why cook a steak in a kitchen when you have a fireplace? Hey everyone, here at Kanpai Wine's Estate Vineyard, Meadowbrook Farm. I want to share with you guys another food and wine pairing video. Behind me here is a fireplace that has been here since the 1800s, and it actually used to be used as a kitchen, so thought it'd be fun to show you guys how to fire off a couple steaks right here in this fireplace with wood from the property. Show you guys the vineyard, show you guys the garden, talk a little bit more about this wine, cook some delicious food. Should be fun, so let's get rolling. Cheers, kanpai. Before we move into the cooking portion of today's video, I wanted to share with you guys our estate vineyard and read to you guys a quote directly from our viticulturalist and winemaker himself, Steve Mathiasen, about our unique terroir. The vineyard lies in the mouth of the Dry Creek Canyon in the Oknol AVA. The cool air rolls down from Mount Veeder, shielding the grapes from the intense afternoon sun. Harbored by the coolness of the vineyard, the fruit develops a uniquely strong backbone of acidity and tannin. The vineyard produces in our wine complex savory flavors of olive, tea leaf, and tobacco. Now I know that quote sounds really abstract, but actually showing you guys the vineyard on a hot afternoon with the wind blowing down from Mount Veeder, which is right behind the vineyard in the backdrop, really gives you a visual idea of what our winemaker is talking about and how this wind chill combined with the big temperature gaps already in Napa create some of the complex savory notes in our vineyard and the wine. Now, steak and Cabernet Sauvignon is already a really classic pairing, but to further enhance the food to go with the wine and match those complex savory notes that our winemaker talks about, I thought I'd go into our culinary garden and pick some rosemary and thyme for the steak, as well as some Italian parsley for the chimichurri sauce that's gonna go on top. Now, we actually dry a lot of the herbs from the garden, so I thought we'd do a little fun experiment and compare a steak cooked with fresh herbs versus a steak cooked with dried herbs. So we're gonna be cooking the steak two ways today as a little added bonus for you guys. So now let's start with the version of the steak using dried herbs. What we're going to be using today is a prime New York strip. You're going to need kosher salt, black pepper, garlic powder, dried rosemary, and dried thyme. So first up, this is a pretty thick steak, so we're going to be liberally seasoning both sides with salt and garlic powder. And then we're going to move on to the thyme. Press the thyme into the steak to make sure that it will stay on. Repeat the process with the rosemary, and then finally we're going to crack some fresh black pepper onto both sides of the steak. And now we're going to take our steak and put it into a vacuum sealed bag along with any herbs that are remaining on the board. You can go ahead and put all of those into the bag with the steak. Finally, we're going to seal them up and we're ready to move on to the next step. So now let's move on to making our chimichurri sauce. First up, for our fresh ingredients, you're going to need 2 large bunches of Italian parsley, 1 large shallot, and 3 small garlic cloves. For our wet ingredients, we're going to need 2 cups of olive oil along with 3 tablespoons of sherry vinegar. And now for our dry ingredients, we're going to need 2 tablespoons of kosher salt, 1 tablespoon of red chili flakes, and 4 tablespoons of ground cumin. Now the last ingredient, honey, comes with a caveat. I found that sometimes the Italian parsley can be a little bit too bitter, and I'll adjust with a tablespoon of honey. But sometimes Italian parsley is quite sweet, and I find that I don't need to add honey at all. Next, let's cut the Italian parsley and the shallots slightly down just so they won't get caught in the food processor. Now you're going to see as I make this sauce that chimichurri is much more of an art than it is a science. A lot of these ingredients, I'm not going to use the full amount. I'm going to keep adjusting and tasting as I go based on my personal preference. And while I'm tasting the sauce, I'm going to sip a little wine just to see how the interplay between all the flavors are working. So first step is that I'm going to put all of my fresh ingredients into my food processor and start pulsing them together, just until they're roughly chopped. We do this step so you don't end up with the food processor getting stuck in all of your chopped fresh ingredients at the bottom. So once my fresh ingredients are roughly chopped, I'm going to set my food processor to a puree setting and start drizzling in my olive oil. What makes my chimichurri unique is that I really like a thick sauce, so I minimize the amount of olive oil. I want more herbs than there is olive oil in the sauce. So I drizzle it in the olive oil until I get a really thick green consistency, just like you see in the video here. And now we move on to our dry ingredients. My recommendation is that you add half of all of your dry ingredients first, taste, and see how you like it. You want it more earthy, add more cumin. More salty, more salt, more spicy, more red chili flakes. As you can see from the video here, I ended up adding all of my cumin and all of my red chili flakes, but I decided to keep the salt at the same level that it was. And now finally, I'd like to do one last tasting and share with you guys my thought process for adjusting the taste in the sauce. First off, I'm looking for the balance between acidity and fattiness. If I think it's too acidic, then I'll add more olive oil. If I think it's too oily, then I'll add more vinegar. Next up would be the balance between bitter and spice and sweetness. So if it's too bitter or too spicy, then I'll add a tablespoon or two of honey. And once you're happy with the seasoning, you've got yourself a completed chimichurri sauce. This sauce, today we're serving it with steak, but it's extremely versatile. It will go with almost any protein, and what's great is that it'll store for up to 2 weeks in a covered container inside of the fridge. First up, you're going to take the steak that you vacuum sealed earlier with the dry herbs and lower it into a 135 degree water bath. You can leave the steak in this water bath for as little as 1 hour and all the way up to 2 hours until you're ready to sear your steak. And now for our steak utilizing fresh herbs and fresh garlic. First up, we're going to preheat a cast iron skillet over medium-high heat for 5 minutes. Then we're going to melt 4 tablespoons of clarified butter into the skillet. Also, before you start searing your steak, you'll want to make sure to start preheating your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Now the steak I'm about to lower into the skillet is just seasoned with salt and freshly ground black pepper, just like we did with the steak using the dry herbs and dried garlic powder. Once your steak is in the skillet, turn your heat all the way up to high. We're going to sear each side of the steak initially for 90 seconds on each side. After you've done 90 seconds on both sides, then we're going to flip the steak every 30 seconds and do this twice. So in total, we're going to sear this steak for a total of 5 minutes, 2.5 minutes on each side. After you're done searing the steak, take it out of the pan and turn off the heat. And now with the heat off, we're going to add in 4 fresh sprigs of rosemary, 4 fresh sprigs of thyme, along with 6 crushed cloves of garlic. And now we're going to move our garlic and our herbs around inside the skillet for 1 minute, infusing our clarified butter with the flavor of the herbs and garlic and being careful not to let our herbs burn. After 1 minute, we're going to put our steak back into our skillet and then put all of our herbs and garlic right on top of the steak. And now we're going to move our steak to one side of the pan, tilt our pan down, and start basting the steak with our clarified butter. We're going to continue basting all over the steak for 1 minute on each side. From here, you're going to put your skillet with your steak and the herbs on top directly into a 350 degree oven for approximately 5 minutes, or until your steak registers an internal temperature of approximately 130 degrees Fahrenheit. As you can see, I hit 131 degrees here, and now I'm going to take the steak, let it rest off to the side, and carryover cooking will take it to 135 degrees, which is exactly the same temperature as we've set our dry herb sous vide steak on. Now, let's fire up the fireplace with some oak from the property and finish off searing our dry herb steak. This fireplace that we have on property here is actually from the 1800s and has a little bit of history behind it. It's actually big enough for an entire person to walk in, and I guess this is what they used to use to actually cook their food in. Today, I'm sure that they didn't have blowtorches back in the 1800s, but I'm going to be using a blowtorch today to get this fire started and sear off the sous vide dry herb steak. To go with my two steaks, since we're firing up the grill anyways, I just have some asparagus that I'm gonna lightly coat with some olive oil and some kosher salt, and some fire grilled asparagus will be a really nice side dish to go with the chimichurri sauce and the steaks. So now our sous vide steak has been in the circulator for about an hour and a half, and we're ready to take it out and move it to finish on the grill. So we're gonna take the bag out of the sous vide machine and take the steak out of the bag and then move to the grill, which is at a perfect state right now because the fire is just roaring away, which is exactly what we want to get a perfectly nice sear on our steak. Since our steak is already cooked to a perfect medium rare for being in the 135-degree water bath for an hour and a half, all we need to do is get a nice surface sear on the steak. So this is only gonna need 1 minute per side over this roaring fire inside of the fireplace. For the asparagus, it's super simple. I simply move the asparagus in and out over the direct fire until I'm satisfied with the level of char on the asparagus. Then I move the asparagus onto indirect heat and constantly test each piece with a fork until the desired tenderness is reached. Then we have beautiful grilled asparagus, and now we're ready to cut and plate the steak for tasting. So first up, let's go to the cutting board and compare the cross section of both of these steaks to see how we did on our cook. As I cut open the fresh herb steak done using traditional methods, and as I cut open the sous vide steak using dry herbs, you can see that both of them look like a perfect medium rare, which is to be expected because both of them were cooked to 135 degrees. But steak is not about the eye test. Coming up is what's important, the all-important taste test. Alright, so it's the end of the workday. I got a couple of my colleagues with me to test out these two steaks. I've been talking a lot about the two methods, but it'd be one thing to just take it from me. We're doing a blind taste testing for steak, not wine today, which is fun. We got steak A, we'll just call steak A on your left, steak B on your right. Go for steak A first. Okay, tell me what you think. Alright, remember that dish in your mind? Go for half a steak B. That was really good. First question. Steak A, steak B. Which one has a more prominent and pronounced herb flavor?
B.
B. B. Okay. Tenderness, mouthfeel, overall, steak A or steak B? Which would you prefer?
Definitely B.
Overall flavor, overall juiciness, just overall score period, A or B?
Definitely B.
The
flavors just pop. The tenderness is, it melts in your mouth. It'd be.
Yeah, the herbs pretty much come right out.
I think the herbs really come through and help with the wine pairing on B.
I think the herbs for steak B definitely kind of help mask a little bit of the tannins.
I agree with both these guys. I think it's juicier, more flavorful, and you need something to stand up to the tannins. A is just a little bit more bland, and steak B, there's just a whole lot more overall flavor there. So it's a 4 out of 4 sweep for steak B. And now I reveal the test to you guys. That's steak A on your left. A reverse sear with the butter basting and the herbs. Steak B is actually dried garlic powder, dried thyme, dried rosemary, put into a sous vide bag at 135 degrees, and then finished over the open fire. So it's kind of a little bit of fun myth busting of why everyone, because I'm not a believer in that fresh is always better. So in this case, we have a 4 out of 4 sweep for steak B. And not to mention, because our audience, I feel like everyone will be cooking at home and entertaining and hosting friends at the same time. You know, I just think it's impractical for them to stand over a cast iron pan and fire off like 6 different steaks for people, right? But I think it's doable if you have a nice water bath and then you're able to do the dry herbs and keep it at temperature. You can sear it off when you want. I literally had to watch steak A like a hawk, and every minute counted for me to get it perfectly at 130 degrees. Whereas steak B, I just set it, forget it. Could have left it there for 1 hour, 2 hours while I talk with friends.
Drink a little wine with friends.
Drink a little wine. And if I'm a little tipsy and I get like not so detail oriented, it's not an issue. So now we're back in the kitchen. It's fairly obvious that all of my colleagues prefer steak B. So I'm gonna make a couple thin slices of steak B, put the fire grilled asparagus to the side, and generously spoon over some of that delicious chimichurri sauce that we've made earlier.
Bon appetit. Kaido.
Spectacular.
I know wine is expensive, these ingredients aren't cheap, but honestly, at the end of the day, wine is meant to pair with food. Don't be afraid to go out there and try new things. We give you tips to kind of lower that risk, but don't be afraid to experiment. You know, it's all about learning.
Yeah, that's a fantastic way to end the day.
Yeah, right? If you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and we'll look at the comments if you have any other ideas for food and wine pairing videos that you'd like to see. Or it doesn't even have to be food and wine. If you just want to see like different content, let us know in the comments below. We'll take all that into account. And stay tuned for more. There's a lot more coming.